Hey, I'm Jeff and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about how to propagate plants like philodendron, pothos, anthurium, alocasia, and even syngonium. Now there's many different ways of propagating each of those, and I'm going to try and keep it as simple as possible. But you can propagate by water or soil methods. There are perlite prop boxes, air layering methods, pot extenders. You can propagate by corms, division, all that kind of stuff. So let's check it out. I'm going to use this beautiful Mandula pothos as an example, and it's no different for whether it is a trailing plant or a climbing plant. And this can be interchangeable between philodendrons and pothos plants specifically. So this is obviously a trailing pothos, a Mandula pothos. And you can see right here, there's a little section where it's lost all its leaves. You want to make the cut in between two nodes. So here's a node, and all the way kind of up the stem. Now, there are no leaves up here, so what I want to do is cut it in between two nodes like that. Now, what you have here is a stem cutting, so there's a couple different ways you can go forward with this. What I like to do is basically just place it in water. That is the easiest and simple method for propagating a plant. And a perfect example of this is the Baltic blue pothos that I have rooting in water. This one's been in water for a long time, so you can see it's got a nice healthy root system. But all you do, if you want to keep it as a stem cutting like this, you just place it in a container of water. What I'm going to do is probably cut off a couple leaves here just to accommodate the stem, but you can just cut the leaves off like that and then stick this stem portion directly in the water to root, just like that. Now I prefer the water propagation method because I've had really good success with plants rooting in water. Sometimes it might take a little bit longer than others. Now when it comes to placing the cutting directly in soil, I've had less success than with water. So this is the method that I prefer. Now if you want multiple plants from one stem like this, you can take individual node cuttings. So I'm actually going to cut this portion off like that. This you can propagate as well, but if you want to make many plants from one cutting like this, you can take individual node cuttings. So you want to cut again in between the nodes. So here's a node, here's a leaf, and you want to cut in between that. Whoops, it's hard to do with one hand. But here is a node cutting. So there's the node, it has some little aerial roots and it has a leaf attached. You will get a new growth point from this node cutting and it'll grow into its own new separate plant. So if you have a section of stem that has 8 leaves or so, you can take node cuttings. I'm just going to prop it up like that. And you can cut them all into individual node cuttings. So here's a new plant. And here's a new plant as well. So you can make many plants from one stem like this. My table's starting to get a little cramped here, but I do have an example of a single node cutting from, I believe this is the Florida green. But here's a node cutting, and you can see it's now sprouted a new growth point from that node, and this is going to turn into basically a new plant by itself. The growth will kind of pop out of here and it'll continue to grow, pushing out new nodes and leaves. So from one leaf, I get an entirely new plant. So this can be applied to philodendron, pothos, and even syngonium. And here is a water propagated. These are all syngoniums, syngonium cheaphense. I just placed them in water, super healthy. And you can see these cuttings as well. There's a few of them in here, have all gotten roots. So these are just the stem cuttings. Okay, here is the mother plant or the bottom portion. So this is where I've previously made the cuts. So I took the cutting, placed it in the container of water, but this is what happens with the plant that is remaining. It activates nodes lower in the stem, and this will be the same thing that will happen to the pothos. The Mandula pothos, where I made the cut right here, it's going to activate these nodes and produce multiple areas of new growth. So you can see here's a new growth as well as right here. And it looks like there's another node that's activated down there. So when you make the cut, the plant is not going to die. It's actually going to rejuvenate it and it's going to stimulate or promote new growth on the stem. So I've been growing this for probably a couple months now, and it's finally pushing out some new growth. So don't be afraid to prune your plants. You're not going to kill it. You're actually going to stimulate new growth when you make a cut. Now I'm going to talk about one of my favorite propagation methods. It is the air layering method. The concept behind it is growing roots on the stem before you ever make the cut. Now you can do this by a couple different methods. You can simply just use sphagnum moss in like a Ziploc bag or some sort of plastic, and you just want to encase or completely surround the roots on the plant. The roots will grow into the growing medium, and then once it's rooted or fully rooted, you can take the cutting and then place it in its own container. It's a super easy, effective way to establish roots before even making the cut. Now you can buy these little cups, I guess you can call them, on Amazon. There's different sizes. You can buy them at plant shops and that sort of thing. And it's the same concept. You just place your growing medium in the cups. And again, this can be applied to trailing plants as well as ones on planks and that sort of thing. But you take your plant, you place the stem in the little grooves, and then you simply close the canister or just secure your plastic bag, and you just let it root. Now every few days you want to make sure that the moss or even soil stays moist or damp. You don't want to let it get dry, otherwise those roots are going to dry up as well. So you can simply just place like a little watering can or something in there and then just soak the soil kind of thing. Over the course of a few weeks you'll start to see roots kind of poking out of the moss through the plastic here. Well, not through the plastic, but you can see it through the plastic, and then you can simply just cut the stem off and you can place it in its own new pot, and you have a whole new plant rooted before you even make the cutting. That's how I rooted my very large Monstera back here. I didn't want to take a stem cutting and put it in water or soil because I was too afraid that I was going to lose that top cutting, as it's an absolutely beautiful, gorgeous plant. So what I did was placed a very large plastic Ziploc bag on it. I'll insert some footage here, and I let it root over the course of several weeks. And once it got a large enough root system, then I chopped it up and placed it in the pot. And it's had really no issues at all. It didn't go through any sort of shock or anything like that. It was a really effective way of rooting a Monstera, specifically a large Monstera. But regardless of the size, as you can see, you've got a small little plant, you can basically root any size, small, medium, large plant by this method, and it is extremely effective. And it's pretty much the same concept when you have a plant growing on a moss pole. Once it grows above the initial pole, you can add on an extension piece, let that plant continue to grow up into the new moss pole, and then you can basically just chop those two in half, take that top cutting, put it in a separate pot, and you can have the original one remain on the moss pole. It's going to activate those nodes and get new growth points, but you can see how the roots grow very nicely in the moss. And it's quite easy once it extends onto the second or third pole, then you can chop it up, and it's the same concept as the air layering method. You will have an established root system when you take that top cutting. Now sometimes I do get the question of, can you grow an entirely new plant just from a leaf by itself? So this is the Mandula pothos. It's no different, again, for philodendron, a pothos plant, a syngonium, all that kind of stuff. You cannot grow a new plant from a single leaf like this. You need the node. You need this portion to sprout new growth. That's where it's going to get a new growth point. So just an individual leaf like this will not grow, but you need the node. And I'll show you what I'm going to be doing with these individual ones. Now that's not true for every plant. If you have a jade plant or any sort of succulent, you can take the leaf off like this and literally just throw it right back in or on the soil, and it will sprout roots and get a new growth point from just a single leaf. So you don't need a node or anything from a jade or succulent. You just take the leaf off and lay it in a container of soil like that and let it grow. Now I'm going to talk a bit about alocasias. Now I'm not an expert with these plants. There's a couple ways you can propagate. One of the most popular ways is to find little corms in the soil. So I'll be taking this out of the mix here. This is the one that I've been rooting in just straight perlite for the last couple of years. and you can see the roots aren't looking the greatest. So I want to take it out, see if there's any corms. But you might also be asking, what is this little contraption on top here? So this is a pot extender. I basically cut out the bottom of a small little pot, and the reason why I did that is because the stem, over time, the plant will lose its leaves, the stem will get kind of stretched out, and there'll be no leaves on the bottom. So I like to add a pot extender with some soil or perlite or sphagnum moss, and then that way that top portion can root into the growing medium, very similar to the air layering method. And then I can chop the top off and place it in its own new pot. So I want to do that first. I'm going to take this little container off. Ooh, I got some gooey tape on there. So I'm just going to remove that just around the edge here, just so you can see. I cut it down the middle, I cut out the bottom of the pot, and then I just wrapped it around the stem. And you can see, looks like we got, this might be a new growth point, and then actually, I don't know if these are roots or not. So I'm just going to take my pruning shears, and I'm going to cut the top off like that. And now I have a separate plant. Those look like new growth points. Those are not roots. So these are what are called bulbils, I believe. Bulbils. They're very similar to corms, but they will sprout a new growth point. Here's one tiny little root at the bottom. So there's a root. These are new growth points. So these are new plants starting off the main stem. So yeah, okay, interesting. But now I'm just going to dump this out and see if we can find any corms in or on the main stem here. So again, here's another little growth point. I'm looking for corms, and right here, here's a corm. So this is what I'm looking for. This is an entire new plant right here. So if you're ever changing out soil for alocasias, make sure you check the soil here and not throw it out, because you're basically throwing out individual plants. So there's a couple right there. I'm happy I'm finding these because this one really hasn't been doing well for a while, so I want to place it in pon. Here's a nice rooted one. It's got some nice roots on there. So I'm going to place these in pon, and that way I can get some beautiful dragon scales again. So there are a number of corms, and I'll show you what to do with these. Now you can keep this in the original soil or in the original pot, but in my experience, I really haven't had good success with the stump generating new growth. I have some leftover pon from another project right there. So yeah, what I'm going to do is use a 2-cup like plastic cup system. It has drain holes in the bottom of this one, and I'm going to be using this as kind of like a cache pot. And I'm just going to make sure that these holes are large enough in the bottom, and then I'm just going to place the cutting in there like that, and I'm just going to be adding the lechuza pon just into the cup. So I'm just going to hold it in place like that, and then I'm just going to dump in the pon, and then I'm just going to thoroughly water that, and hopefully it can establish a nice root system in pon here. One more scoopful should be good, and then I'll give it some water. This is my IKEA greenhouse cabinet, and I did do the pot extension on this plant. This is the Queen Anthurium, but I want to show you a much better example. This is the King of Spades, but you can see there's a pot extender on top here as well, and you can see the roots are growing in nicely into the aroid mix. So this is a great example of when the stem kind of gets stretched out like that. You put the pot extender around the stem with the growing medium, and look at those chunky roots. So this one is doing very, very well. I'm not going to chop this one today because I don't want to, but it will be for another video down the road. I promise we are almost done. This is the perlite prop box. This is one of my favorite methods of propagating plants, and this will be the last method that we'll be going through. This is simply just a Chinese takeout container, and I add perlite into the container. And here's what I have growing in it. It just looks like a bowl of salad right now. So there are a number of different plants in here. I have Alocasia anthurium, and I believe there is a philodendron in here somewhere as well. So I will start with the alocasia corms. Now, you can simply just place the corm in the container like that, and you're done. What I like to do is you can peel off like all of the bark. I like to just do the top just because it gets in your fingernails and that sort of thing, but you can do just the top because that's primarily where the roots will grow from. So this little piece is where it was attached to the plant. I like to plant this at the bottom. This is the new growth point. This is where the new plant will come from, and the roots will grow along the top. Let's see if there's an example in the container here of a newer corm right here. So this is, I don't even know what kind of alocasia this is, but you can see the roots are coming primarily from the top, and here's the new growth point. Now it has sprouted through the barky stuff, but I find if you take the bark off, it roots faster. It doesn't have to break through that crusty material, and eventually you'll get a, I have a bunch of jacquelines in here, and they're all like tangled up. So I'm just going to pull one out. So this is how it grows. So this is a tiny one, but here's just the tiny little corm. All the roots grew from the top, and then it pushes out the new growth point. And just because I had it laying on its side, that's why the orientation is just a little bit different. But I have numerous tiny little Jacqueline corms, and then I believe these are the dragon scale as well. So I'm just going to see if I can pop one of these out. I have really good success with perlite, and the nice thing about using perlite compared to sphagnum moss is really hard to get off these finer roots. Sometimes you end up pulling the roots and damaging the root system, whereas if you have it in perlite, I don't have to remove any of the perlite because you have perlite in soil as a soil amendment. So virtually there's no damaging or transition phase. You can just take this cutting, put it in an aroid mix or whatever medium that you grow it in, and there's really no, there's no troubleshooting, there's no issues. You can just place it in the container. So same thing, there's the corm, all the roots pretty much grew near the top, and then here's the new growth point. So this one is definitely ready to go in a container of soil, and over time the leaves will obviously straighten out, and it'll turn into a nice, beautiful plant. Now for the perlite prop box itself, what I do is I add dry perlite in before I place any of the cuttings in or corms, that sort of thing. I will rinse the perlite and I will drain all the water. You don't want any standing water at the bottom of the container. When it dries out, like if you're constantly opening the lid and closing it, it's going to dry out over time. You can simply take like a misting bottle, spray down the perlite as well as the plants, and then that's pretty much all I do. I don't add any fertilizer. I don't do anything with it. I just keep the lid on and place it in a bright area, whether that's from grow lights or natural sunlight. You just want to make sure that they get sufficient light. I've rarely had any cuttings ever rot in a perlite prop box. Now they are prone to algae as well, so there can be some complications. It's not a completely flawless system, but the success rate for any type of plant that you place in it, whether it's an alocasia anthurium or even these node cuttings, you will have great success. So all you can do, or all you need to do with the single node cutting, stick it right in the perlite and you're done. Now the last plant I want to talk about is anthuriums. This is a tiny little stem cutting of an anthurium that basically lost all its leaves, and you can see it's pushed out a growth point and it's actually got a new little leaf. So that is pretty cute. Now the thing that I've noticed with anthuriums, as the stem grows, it'll push out roots from the nodes, and then once it establishes a root system, you can simply cut this growth point right off the main portion of the stem, and then you can root it or place it in a container of soil, or again, whatever medium it is that you decide to use. So that is a really easy, successful way to propagate anthuriums, as well as the pot extender like I showed with that other plant in the IKEA cabinet. So that is pretty well a rundown of every propagation method that I use. And like I said, water and the perlite prop boxes are probably my most successful methods with all my propagations. Now here are the remaining corms, which I'm just going to literally throw in the container and then place the lid on top. I am squishing some of these leaves. I'm going to have to get a larger prop box, but I've drastically reduced the amount of propagations that I have. I had like a ton of containers before, but I've narrowed it down to one little container. So I hope you found this video useful, and I hope you can apply it to your houseplants. Don't be afraid or scared to propagate a houseplant. I know it can be pretty scary or intimidating when you first propagate a plant or chop it up, that sort of thing, but I promise you with these methods and hopefully with this information, you can feel a little bit more comfortable propagating and chopping up your plants. If you have any other comments or questions, please leave it down below in the comment section. I do appreciate all the support. Thanks for watching my videos. Take care, everyone. Bye.